anything else, I'll just jump right into things, and I'll tell you that I don't remember. I remember one other Tisha B'Av, exactly 18 years ago today, where I felt the way I did this year, where the experience of mourning for Yerushalayim was something that I felt very, very powerfully, not as a remembrance of the past and as attempting to connect it with the present and to try to figure out how we can learn lessons, etc., but something that I felt in a very clear and present way. 18 years ago today, we were days away from the what was called at the time the disengagement or the expulsion or the destruction of Gush Katif. I don't want to get into the terminologies, but that was a very tragic event, which really divided Am Yisrael, and it happened exactly at this time. And this year I found myself feeling very, very similarly, because of the events of the past few weeks and the past few months and the past few days. Many people over on both sides over the past days have drawn the parallels of Sinat Chinam and how it seems that the rabbis talk about the second temple being destroyed due to Sinat Chinam. A few years ago, actually, here on WebYeshiva, I gave a shiur. It was a virtual tour, and we talked about that, and we tried to understand what Sinat Chinam meant. And you can watch it if you want. It's on the archives. But the main point that came out of that is that Sinat Chinam was not just some kind of prejudice that people had against each other. It was based on very, very deep ideological positions that people had, each side who felt very, very strongly that what they were doing was right and that the other side's positions were dangerous and damaging and could bring destruction on the entire people. And we talked about the fact that the debate itself is good and healthy. The problem was that it led to violence and that Yerushalayim basically destroyed itself. And many people have pointed out that we seem very, very close to exactly that type of situation right now. A number of months ago, or even a number of weeks ago, when people spoke that way, I said, no, you're exaggerating. It's not that bad. But within the past week, we've seen a number of events that have convinced me that anyone who thinks that talk of a civil war between Jews is just exaggerated or alarmist, at this point has their head buried in the sand. Not because most of the people hate each other, not at all. I'm very, very convinced. I wrote about this earlier in the week on the Times of Israel and social media, that the great majority, and there's been a lot of beautiful examples of this seen in the past few days as well. The great majority of our people here in Israel and around the world, but certainly here in Israel, love each other and respect each other and want to work together to come up with some kind of compromise. But the extremists on both sides, the leaders on both sides, it seems are driving us over the edge of a cliff. And again, within the past few days, we've seen several incidents where people blocking roads were hit by cars, and it doesn't really matter whether it's because the people blocking the roads were doing something dangerous or the drivers were being irresponsible or whatever, but several incidents where people were almost seriously wounded because of tensions over this. We saw a situation where, I'm deliberately including incidents where both, on both sides of the story, it's not about pointing fingers at one side or the other, but where a mother with 3 small children in her car the car was attacked and the windshield broken by Jews over this issue. And most frighteningly to me, an altercation over this in which a Jew pulled out a gun and fired a bullet. For now, thank God, only in the air. But if anyone thinks that the possibilities of civil war are not a clear and present danger, at this point, I think we have our heads in the sand. And here it is, Tisha B'Av. The problem was that the rabbis talk about that situation of sinat chinam, which seems so powerful to what we're going through now in connection with the second temple, the second Beit HaMikdash. And our shir tonight, and I'll already share my screen, our shir tonight, the topic of which I committed to probably a month or two ago, is about King Yoshiyahu. We're talking here about the first temple, the first Beit HaMikdash, and the rabbis attribute, based on the evidence in the text itself, the rabbis attribute the destruction, the korban of Bayit Rishon, of the first Beit HaMikdash, to other factors entirely, and therefore one could question whether drawing parallels to today is relevant. At one point, I thought maybe I should speak about something else, but I had already committed to the topic. However, as I sat down yesterday, primarily to kind of put together this shiur, I had shivers running down my spine because it just kept jumping out of the page at me. The number of very, very strong parallels between our situation and that at the end of the days of the first Beit HaMikdash as described in the Tanakh, and also some very powerful messages that I think chart for us a potential way forward, and that's what I want to hopefully get to towards the end of this year. So let's just jump right in. I'll mention also, if anybody was in my shir here on Tisha B'Av last year, I doubt you remember, but it's also in the archive. I gave a shir last year on King Menashe, who ruled shortly before King Yoshiyahu. He was actually Yoshiyahu's grandfather. And therefore, this shir, to a certain extent, is part two of what we spoke about last year. For those who weren't there, or for those who don't remember, which is probably most of those who were there, let me just give a very brief overview because it's crucial. We can't understand Menashe until we understand Yoshiyahu. I'm sorry, we can't understand Yoshiyahu until we understand Menashe. Menashe is known by the Tanakh as one of the most evil kings we ever had. As we'll see in a moment, the Churban, the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, is blamed explicitly multiple times on Menashe. Menashe brought in state-sponsored idolatry, murder into the land, worship of Molech, the worst abominations were all perpetrated by King Menashe. In the shir we gave last year, we tried to see a little bit more depth than just this is an evil man. We asked how it's possible as the son of King Chizkiyahu, who's one of the greatest kings we ever had. Chizkiyahu was, according to the Gemara in Sanhedrin, almost became the Melech HaMashiach. And his son fell to such depths. How was that possible? So last year we developed a whole discussion about it. Again, if anyone's interested, the shir is in the archives. But basically, the explanation that I went with last year that I think is really what's behind Menashe is that Menashe lived in what I called a post-Holocaust generation. There was a Churban in the days of Chizkiyahu, and here we can already begin to look at this chart here. By the way, there's a handout for this year, which you're welcome to download if you haven't already, but you also don't need to because it's right here on the screen. I'll be working right off of it. And here we have a chart of the last 150 years or so of 140 years of the days of the first Beit HaMikdash. During the days of Chizkiyahu, the northern kingdom with the 10 tribes was destroyed in exile. That happened in Chizkiyahu's 6th year by the enemy Ashur, the Assyrian Empire. And Ashur then invaded the land of Yehudah as well and destroyed all the cities of Yehudah. And there was almost a complete destruction. In the end, Yerushalayim was saved due to a miracle. But we explained Menashe in the context of just living in a post-Holocaust generation, and I won't go over that shir completely. But we also saw there that Sefer Divrei Hayamim tells us that Menashe did tshuva. Sefer Malachim doesn't say a word about it. We talked about that last year. But Sefer Divrei Hayamim tells us that Menashe did tshuva. According to the Gemara, Masechet Sanhedrin, this happened in the 22nd year of his 55-year reign. It's interesting. Menashe ruled longer than any other king. And I'll come back to the rest of the chart in a minute, but you know what? Let me make this just a little bit bigger. That's easier for people to see. I want to look at what the Tanakh says. I'm going to read all the psukim in the Hebrew. You have English translations below for those who find that helpful. This is Sefer Melachim, in the days of, after telling us in the description of what Menashe did, at the end of the days of Menashe, we're told by Daber Adonai biyad avadav haneviim lemor. There's a nevuah from some anonymous neviim. It doesn't say here who the neviim are. Rashi quotes a tradition of Chazal that we're talking about the neviim Nachum and Chabakuk, who we know from the Treasar. There are other sources that include Yoel as well. Maybe it's different neviim. It's left here somewhat anonymous, but in any case, there's a prophecy. And what's the prophecy? Yan asher asa Menashe melech Yehuda toivot ha'ele. Since Menashe, the king of Yehuda, committed these abominations, Heira mikol asher asu ha'emori asher lefanav vayachati gam et Yehuda begilulav. Because Menashe did these terrible things worse than anyone before him, Lachein ko amar Adonai Elohei Yisrael hineni mevi ra'a al Yerushalayim v'Yehuda asher kol shom'a titzalna shtei oznav. God says, I'm going to bring on Yerushalayim and on Yehuda a calamity, the likes of which anyone who hears it, their two ears will ring from hearing this terrible news. And that's a quote. That's a direct quote from a nevuah that was said by Shmuel, by the Navi Shmuel, in the days of Shiloh, predicting the destruction of Shiloh. And so the Navi here is implicitly connecting Yerushalayim with Shiloh and its destruction. And then it goes on and says, "V'natiti al Yerushalayim et kav Shomron." The same way I destroyed Shomron, the northern kingdom with the 10 tribes, I'm going to do the same thing to Yerushalayim. V'et mishkolet beit achav u'machiti et Yerushalayim kasher yimchet atzalachat machav ha'afach al paneh. I'm going to destroy Yerushalayim like you wipe a plate clean and turn it over. That's what I'm going to do to Yerushalayim as well. Yerushalayim is finished. And this nevuah sounds like it is a final gzerah, final decree from which there's no turning back. However, even though God decreed a churban in the days of Menashe, if we go back up here, we'll see that the Beit HaMikdash was not destroyed in the days of Menashe. Not at all. The Beit HaMikdash continued to stand for another 55 years, the same amount of time as Menashe had ruled. His son Amon ruled after him for 2 years. After that, Yoshiyahu for 31 years, and Yoshiyahu is going to be the one that we're going to be speaking about for the majority of the rest of the time we have here. And after Yoshiyahu, there's another 22 years or so where 3 of his sons and 1 of his grandsons ruled. And only after all of that time was this decree carried out. And yet the decree seems to have been issued already in the days of Menashe. So this is the world into which King Yoshiyahu was born. And now let's start reading about Yoshiyahu himself. I'm in source number 2 now. Ben Shmona Shana Yoshiyahu b'malcho. Yoshiyahu rose to the throne at the age of 8. His grandfather, Menashe, had died just 2 years earlier. His father, Amon, who continued his grandfather's evil ways, ruled for just 2 years. He was assassinated, actually, and at the age of 8, Yoshiyahu rises to the throne, a child. Ushloshim v'achat shana malach b'Yerushalayim v'shem imo Yedida, etc. Vayas hayashar b'nei Adonai. Suddenly we have a king who's doing the right thing. Vayelech b'chol derech David aviv lo sar yaminu smo. He's compared to David HaMelech, to the greatest king we ever had. He arose to the throne at the age of 8, and then we read, Vayhi b'shmona esrei shana lamelech Yoshiyahu, shalach hamelech et Shafan ben Atzalyahu ben Mishulam HaShofer, Beit Hashem lemor aleo Chilkiyahu HaKohen HaGadol, vayatem et hakesef hamuva Beit Adonai asher asfu shomrei asaf me'et ha'am. We read about a major project that Yoshiyahu embarked on in his 18th year. That means he was 26 years old, right? He became king at 8, and now he's 18. 26 years old. Yoshiyahu is now an adult, a young adult, but an adult, and he embarks on a process of renovating the Beit HaMikdash. And in a minute, we're going to read about how they found a Sefer Torah in the Beit HaMikdash. And Yoshiyahu embarked on an entire journey of traveling around the country, or sending at least people around the country, and purifying the land of idolatry and really trying to make a major change. But before we go on, I want to look at the parallel passage in Sefer Divrei Hayamim, which gives us just a little bit more insight into Yoshiyahu's early years. Sefer Divrei Hayamim, for those who are not familiar, is parallel to the books of Shmuel and Melachim. The same events that are discussed in Shmuel and Melachim, the same stories, are told in Sefer Divrei Hayamim, but oftentimes with discrepancies between them, or with information that's given in one and not necessarily in the other. So it often pays to look at both of them. When we look in Divrei Hayamim, we get a little bit more information than we had before. We read Ben Shmona Shanim Yoshiyahu b'malcho u'shloshim v'achat shana malach b'Yerushalayim v'yasa yashar. It starts off the same way, but now we're told u'v'shmona shanim b'malcho. In the 8th year of his reign, when he was only 16, v'hu odenu nar, he was still a child or an adolescent, I guess. Heichel lidrosh le'Elohei David aviv. It started in his 8th year already. He started the process of searching out God. Uv'shtei mesrei shana heichel litaher et Yehuda v'Yerushalayim min habamot ve'asherim ve'apsalim ve'masechot v'yanatzu lefanav et mizbechot habealim. And it starts talking about how he goes on this rampage of smashing pagan altars and purifying Yerushalayim and Yehuda, the whole country, and Yerushalayim, from the idolatry that had been in place since the days of his grandfather Menashe. Now, the fact that happened in the 12th year and not the 18th year, right? Sefer Malachim tells us about the 18th year. Sefer Divrei Hayamim gets to the 18th year also. The 18th year of Yoshiyahu is a very significant year, as we'll see in a moment. But the fact that he started 10 years to some extent, and certainly 6 years earlier, I think is significant for two reasons. First of all, it means that even before he found that Sefer Torah that we're going to read about, Yoshiyahu already was on this path towards trying to do the right thing and trying to make a change from what his father and his grandfather had done. In a sense, Yoshiyahu was trying to return to the ways of his great-grandfather, the great Chizkiyahu. And it's also important because a little bit later on in this year, we're going to talk about the great Navi of that time, the great prophet Yirmiyahu. And in Yirmiyahu, in the first parak of Yirmiyahu, we read it in the Haftarah a few weeks ago, we read that Yirmiyahu began to prophesy in the 13th year of Yoshiyahu. And here we see that Yoshiyahu began his heroic acts to try to change the situation and to purify the land already in his 12th year. In other words, before Yirmiyahu was on the scene as well. This was Yoshiyahu's personal initiative. And then we read on, we find something else. He did this in Yerushalayim, v'yanatzu lefanav et mizbechot habealim, etc. And he slaughtered pagan priests. And he did this not only in Yehuda, but uve'arei Menashe ve'Ephraim ve'Shimon ve'ad Naftali saviv. And that's very significant. I want to show you a map. We're here. This is a map of what had been the divided kingdom. Okay? The area here in bright green is what's called Mamlechet Yehuda, the kingdom that was ruled from Yerushalayim by the descendants of David. Up here in dark green, this is Mamlechet Yisrael. This is the territory of the 10 tribes. This kingdom had been destroyed already something like 70-something years earlier, even 80 years earlier. And yet it tells us that Yoshiyahu, we can get them both on the screen at the same time, that Yoshiyahu did what he did, Be'arei Menashe ve'Ephraim ve'Shimon ve'ad Naftali. So it's not on this map here, but the names of the tribes, but this is the area of Ephraim, this is the area of Menashe, okay, Shimon is down here, and Naphtali goes all the way up here. What are we seeing from this? We're seeing that Yoshiyahu exerted his influence even beyond the borders of his own kingdom, and we have to ask, wait a second, but who is he doing that for? What pagan altars is he destroying? Earlier in Sefer Melachim, we read that the 10 tribes that had inhabited this kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, Mamlechet Yisrael, had already been exiled. And foreigners, pagans, had been brought in instead. So who exactly is Yoshiyahu influencing? Come back to that in a few minutes. But Yoshiyahu clearly, even before, Even before Yirmiyahu stepped on the scene, and even before finding the Sefer Torah, Yoshiyahu embarked on this major campaign of tshuva, of repentance. Now let's read what happened in his 18th year. So now I'm back to the book of Melachim. ויאמר חלקיהו הכהן הגדול על שפן הסופר, ספר התורה מצאתי בבית אדוני, ויתן חלקיה את הספר על שפן ויקראהו. They were renovating the Beit HaMikdash. They were purifying the Beit HaMikdash from all the impurity, all the idolatry that was there, and they found something. Okay, this is reminiscent maybe of something that happened hundreds and hundreds of years in the future in the days of the second Beit HaMikdash, right? In the days of the Maccabim, the early days of the Chashmonaim, when the Hellenists had defiled the Mikdash, and they purified it, and they found that one flask of oil. So here they found a Sefer Torah thrown in some back closet in the Beit HaMikdash, and Chilkiah the Kohen gives it to Shaphan, who is one of the officers of the king, and he reads it. Vayavo Shaphan Sofer el HaMelech, and he tells him, "Listen, we did all of this. Vayaged Shaphan Sofer el HaMelech Sefer Natan li Chilkiah Kohen vayikraeu Shaphan lifnei HaMelech." He reads it. It doesn't say here what part of the Sefer they read, but many of the commentaries assume that they were reading Sefer Dvarim, and particularly the end of Sefer Dvarim, the Tochacha, that predicts exile and destruction for those who don't follow the Torah. And they found this Sefer. It sounds like people weren't aware of this. People had stopped learning the Torah. They found this old dusty book in the back corners of the Beit HaMikdash, thrown in some back closet. And they brought it to the king. And they said, this is what it says in God's Torah. And he tore his clothing. He gets together the Kohen Gadol and Shaphan and a few other top officials, and he makes a delegation out of them, and he sends them on a mission. Lemor lerchu dirshu Adonai ba'adi u'ba'ad ha'am u'ba'ad kol Yehuda al divrei ha'sefer ha'nimtza hazeh ki gdola chamat Adonai asher hi nitzta banu al asher lo sham'u avotenu al divrei ha'sefer hazeh la'asot k'chol ha'katuv aleinu. Yoshiyahu says, we better go find a Navi. Go get me a prophecy. We've sinned. We've violated the Torah. Again, from Sefer Melachim, it sounds like this is what shook Yoshiyahu and got him out got him riled up to go and make a change. But from Divrei Yamim, we know that Yoshiyahu was already deep into his religious reforms. He didn't need the Sefer Torah to tell him this. He understood on his own that he has to follow the Torah. But now that he saw the Sefer Torah that was found in the Mikdash, he tore his clothing and he says, what are we going to do? Go find me a Navi. Vayelech Hilkiyahu HaKohen v'chikam v'achbor v'shafan ma'asiyah el Chulda HaNeviah Eshet Shalom ben Tikva. There's this woman, a prophetess, one of 7 prophetesses, female prophets that we have in the Tanakh. And this is all we know about her from the Tanakh, are these few psukim. And they went to her. Vatomer elehem, and they asked her. The king wants to know what he should do. And listen to her response. And when we listen to this, I want us to remember the psukim we saw back in the days of Menashe. Much earlier, there had been this prophecy that Yerushalayim is going to be destroyed. And now Yoshiyahu is in the midst of this process of tshuva. They're purifying the land. They've renovated the Beit HaMikdash. They found the Sefer Torah. Yoshiyahu tore his clothing, the king. And he sends to the Navi, what should we do? Listen to her response. Vatomer alehem, Ko amar Adonai Elohei Yisrael, imru la'ish asher shalach etchem elai. This is what I want you to tell. This is what God says. This is the message to send back to the one who sent you to me. Ko amar Adonai hineni mevi ra'ai el hamakom hazeh v'al yoshvav. Et kol divrei hasefer asher kara melech Yehuda. Yoshiyahu, you know what's going to happen? All the terrible things that you read about, the klalot, they're going to happen. Ko amar Tachat, why? Tachat asher azavuni, since your people abandoned me. Vayikatru Elohim acherim, and they worship foreign gods. And Yoshiyahu is trying to reverse this process. And what's he basically told? He's basically told, it's too late. It's too late. Just like the Nevuah said in the days of Menashe, The Khurban is a fait accompli. It is not changeable. Exactly what it said in the Torah that you're afraid is going to happen, you're right to be afraid. That's exactly what's going to happen. And then she adds, Ve'al melech Yehuda sholech etchem lidrosh Adonai, kol tamrun elav. Send this message also specifically to this king. Ko amar Adonai Elohei Yisrael hadvarim asher shamata. Yan rach levavcha v'tikana mipnei Adonai. But since you heard these things, and you've submitted to the will of God, b'shamacha asher dibarti al hamakom hazeh, and you heard what the terrible things that I've said about this place, Yoshvav, liot l'shamav l'klala. You heard that curses that are going to happen. Vatikrat begadecha, and you tore your clothing. Vativke lefanai, and you cried in repentance. V'gam anochi shamati ne'um Adonai. I have heard your prayers. And what do we expect the next pasuk to say? Therefore, I'm going to undo everything I just said. That's what we expect to hear. That prophecy has now been nullified, or at least might be nullified if you continue your path. That's what we hope to hear, right? First, she repeated the Gzeirah. Then she said, but tell the king, because you've torn your clothing and because you've done tshuva and because you accepted everything, lachen, this is your reward, Yoshiyahu. Hinni osifcha al avotecha. You're going to die early. V'nesafta kivrotecha b'shalom. You're going to die a young man still, but in peace. That's your reward. You're going to get the privilege of dying young so that you don't have to see what's going to happen. Essentially, this is an incredibly harsh message. Essentially, what did she tell him? There's no point in what you're doing. The die has been cast. The decree has been issued. Yerushalayim is going to be destroyed. But I do see that you're a good guy, and I do see that you want good, and you will be rewarded for that personally by not having to see all the terrible things that are going to happen. That is a very, very difficult message to handle. But this message continues throughout Sefer Melachim. I didn't put it on the sheet, but after Yoshiyahu eventually died, as we mentioned above, the kingdom was ruled by 4 of his descendants, 3 of his sons, and 1 of his grandsons. And during the reign of the Melech Yehoiah, you know what? Maybe let's just remind ourselves, because it's going to be important at the end as well. After Yoshiyahu died, we'll talk about his death and how he died in a few minutes as well. After he died, his son Yehoachaz ruled in his place for only 3 months. Yehoachaz was removed from power by the king of Egypt. We'll talk about what the king of Egypt has to do with things in a few minutes as well. But he was replaced by his brother Yehoyakim. And Yehoyakim was a very evil king. And just to finish this off, we're going to talk about Yehoyakim in a second. But after Yehoyakim died, he was replaced by Yehoyachin, who was his son, Yehoyakim's son, that's Yoshiyahu's grandson, who ruled for only 3 months, and he was removed from power at this point already by the king of Babylonia, Nebuchadnezzar, and he was replaced with his uncle, a third son of Yoshiyahu, Tzidkiyahu. We'll talk about both Yehoyakim and Tzidkiyahu a bit later, but for now, I just want to point out on the background of what we've been talking about. So Sefer Melachim said there was a decree given in the days of Menashe by these anonymous Nevi'im, we don't know their names, but that there's going to be a Churban. It says it also in the Chulda Nevi'ah seems to agree with that. She tells Yoshiyahu, there's no difference. It doesn't matter what you do. The Churban is going to happen. And later on, when we read about in Parak Chavdalid of Sefer Melachim, when we read about Yehoyakim, we're told the following. In the days of Yehoyakim, B'yamav ala Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel, v'hilo Yehoyakim eved 3 shanim, v'yishlach Hashem bo et gedudei kasdim et gedudei Aram. The Babylonian army began to invade during the days of Yehoyakim. The Churban began in the days of Yehoyakim already. And Yehoiakim was a very evil king. We know that both from what it says in Malachim and from what we know about him from Sefer Yirmiyahu. But why did this happen? וישלחם ביהודה לעבידו כדבר השם אשר דיבר ביד עבדיו הנביאים, אך על פי אדוני הייתה ביהודה להסיר מעל פניו בחטות מנשה, ככל אשר עשה. When the Churban began in the days of Yehoiakim, the Tanakh says, it's not because Yehoiakim was evil, it's because the time had come to fulfill the decree from the days of Menashe. So the message we're getting here from Sefer Melachim, from beginning to end, is a very, very clear one. And that is, the Gezerah was given, the decree was issued in the days of Yehoiakim, in the days of Menashe. And it doesn't matter afterwards that Yoshiyahu was a great and righteous king who tried desperately to change things. It doesn't matter because it was too late. And it also doesn't matter that afterwards Yehoiakim was a very evil king, because the Churban didn't happen because of Yehoiakim. The Churban happened because it was already a fait accompli before he rose to power also. It sounds like nothing mattered after the days of Menashe. That's a very, very difficult message to accept. And there are at least two people who refused to accept that message. One of them was Yoshiyahu himself. I'm not going to read the lengthy passages. You're welcome to read it on your own afterwards. But there's another parak and a half that describe in great detail in Melachim the rampage that he went on all the way around the country, again making reference to things outside the borders of his kingdom. He spent the rest of his life desperately trying to avoid this Churban that he was already told was going to happen. And we also read in his 18th year, the same year that he got that nevuah from Huldah, about a great Pesach that he organized. A little bit of Malachim and Divrei Hayamim, there's a lot more about this great Pesach. He brought all of the Jews to Yerushalayim. Again, it mentions, including those who came from the area of the 10 tribes. We're still going to have to figure out who they were. But they came to Yerushalayim. A Pesach like had not happened since the days of Yoshua. And he got up there and he made a brit with the people, and the people committed to keeping the Torah after he was given the nevuah. Yoshiyahu absolutely refused to accept this fate. I don't care what the Nevi'ah said to me. I'm ignoring the prophecy. We have to ask where Yoshiyahu got that idea from. He sends people to speak to a prophet of God, and the response he gets is not what he wants to hear, and he says, I'm not listening. I think there are three possible answers to that question. The first one is a very simple logic. If God really made an irreversible decree in the days of Menashe that there's going to be a Churban, then why didn't he just bring the Churban in the days of Menashe? He could have done it. There was an enemy then, Ashur. In fact, in Divrei Hayamim, we're told that Ashur invaded the kingdom and carried Menashe off in chains to exile. He eventually came back. But they could have destroyed. They could have destroyed already in the days of Menashe. Yoshiyahu has to ask himself, why do I exist? What's the purpose of my life? Why was I born? Why did I rise to the throne? What does God want from me? Am I supposed to just sit in my palace drinking wine, waiting for the Churban to happen? If I'm here, there must be a reason. I can't accept this philosophy that it's impossible to change, that the die has been cast, and that the situation is so bad that the bus is driving over the cliff and that we can't step on the brakes. I just can't accept that. Number one. Number two, it could very well be that Yoshiyahu was inspired by a message that he had heard about from his ancestors. You see, back in the days of his grandfather Chizkiyahu, we already heard about a situation where a king of Yehuda ignored a prophecy. King Chizkiyahu was very, very sick. And the Navi Yeshayahu was sent by God. Yeshayahu a Navi, maybe the greatest of the Navi. We can argue whether Yeshayahu or Yirmiyahu is the greatest. I don't know, but they're up there. Yeshayahu a Navi was sent to tell Chizkiyahu, you better prepare your will, because you're not getting out of this bed. You're on your deathbed. And after receiving a prophecy from God, Yoshiyahu ignored the prophecy, turned his back on the prophet, turned his face directly to the wall, and appealed directly to Hashem. And before Yoshiyahu, who apparently left because he wasn't being listened to anymore, before he got outside the palace grounds, God came to Yoshiyahu and sent him back and said, tell King Chizkiyahu, I've accepted his tefillah. I'm giving him another 15 years of life. The Gemara, Masechet Brachot, dramatizes this for us a little bit. There's a lengthy discussion. I only brought here the key point. Yeshayahu ben Amos Hanavi said to him, Ki meta ta v'lo tichya. You're going to die and you're not going to live. The Gemara asks, that's obvious. When people are dead, they're not alive. What does that mean? You're going to die and you're not going to live? Meta ta be'olam hazeh v'lo tichya le'olam haba. Again, I'm not getting into what was the reason for this. I see that there are some questions coming up in the chat. I can't really, because I'm sharing my screen, I can't really see them, but Bezrat Hashem, at the end of the year, before I stop, I'll try to relate to anything that's there. Meta tavalot tichya, even in olam haba, you're finished. Amalek kvar nigzera lecha gzera, and it doesn't matter. Yeshayahu, according to the Gemara, Yeshayahu told him it's too late, because I skipped part of the Gemara where he asked Yeshayahu to pray for him. Yeshayahu said there's nothing to pray for; it's all late. Amalek ben Amotz kalei nevuatcha v'tzei. According to the Gemara, he threw Yeshayahu out of the room. Ben Amotz, I don't need you. Take your prophecies and leave. Kach mekublani mi beit avi abba. I have a tradition from my father's house, probably referring to David HaMelech himself. Afilu cherev chada munachat al tzavaro shel adam al yimna atzmo min harachamim. It's never too late to pray for God's mercy. And therefore, maybe that's what gave Yoshiyahu the extent. If Chizkiyahu could kick Yeshayahu out of the room and say, I don't need your prophecies. I have a direct line to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and a Kadosh Baruch Hu always listens to tefillah. It's never too late. Then I don't need your nevuah either. Hageveret Hulda, Yoshiyahu continues as if there was no nevuah. Maybe that's what gave him the inspiration. But there's another reason. It wasn't only his own logic and the tradition from Chizkiyahu that gave him the strength to reject the prophecy and say it's not too late to make a change. There was at least one other person who agreed with him, and that was Yirmiyahu himself. This is a nevuah, source number 6, Yirmiyahu Parak Gimel into the beginning of Daled, which was given during the days of Yoshiyahu. And it's also part of a much lengthier nevuah that we don't have time to go into. Yirmiyahu speaks to the exiled Jews from Shomron, who he calls Meshuva Yisrael, the wayward Israel, and he speaks to Bagoda Yehuda, the rebellious or the treasonous Yehuda, those that were still there in Yerushalayim that he says are even worse. And after really, really lacing into them with rebuke, he says, Shuvu, again, this is in the days of Yoshiyahu. Shuvu vanim shovavim. Return, my wayward son. Ki anuchi ba'alti bachem. God says, I'm your husband. Lakachti etchem. The metaphor of the husband and wife. And even though you violated the covenant, return and I will accept you. And he says, Ba'etahi, when I accept you, Yikru'u Yerushalayim kisei Hashem v'nikvu elea kol hagoyim. All the nations are going to come to Yerushalayim. It's a vision of Yemot HaMashiach, what we call. Bayamim ha'hema yelchu Beit Yehuda al Beit Yisrael v'yavo yachdav me'eretz Safon. Yirmiyahu is prophesying about not only the possibility of averting a destruction in Yehuda, but of the 10 tribes coming back. They're going to come back from the lands of their exile. And he says again, Shuvu banim shovavim erpa meshuvoteichem. God is waiting for you to return. And he will hear you. Im tashuv Yisrael ne'um Adonai elai tashuv. All you have to do, God says, is abandon the idolatry. So Huldah Hanaviyah might have told Yoshiyahu that there's no chance, but Yirmiyahu was there giving him encouragement, saying, no, there is a chance. Now, first of all, this raises a philosophical question. Is it possible that we can have a machloket between Nevi'im? Can prophets of God disagree with one another? That's what seems to be happening here. Huldah said explicitly, you want to know what to do? There's going to be a churban. It's good that you did tshuva because you're going to get to die early. That's it. And Yirmiyahu is saying, everyone do tshuva. Not only can the churban be averted, the Mashiach can come. The 10 tribes can come back. This can be the redemption. It's not too late. But how can prophets of God disagree with each other if they're bringing the word of God? So it's Tisha B'Av. First of all, I only have a few more minutes. And second of all, it's Tisha B'Av. We're supposed to be focused on Churban, so I don't want to go into that too much. But I'll just point out that if Chachamim, if sages of the Talmud who are studying God's Torah can disagree, and if we can say about them, Elu va'elu divrei Elokim chayim, as the Gemara says about Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, then perhaps that can be true for Nevi'im as well. Maybe there in fact is a machloket, but that machloket ultimately has to be also resolvable. And so, in the next few minutes, let's try to understand. So, armed perhaps with all of this encouragement, Yoshiyahu ignores the decree and spends the rest of his life in a heroic and desperate attempt to make a change. And now let's see how it all ended. Oh, before that, I'm sorry, I want to show you this Gemara in Megillah. The Gemara in Megillah is picking up from with what we were talking about. The Gemara asks a simple question. With all due respect to Huldah Hanaviyah, who was a prophetess and a great person, but why would Yoshiyahu have sent the people to Huldah and not to Yirmiyahu? Yirmiyahu, after all, was the head prophet of the time. So why did they go to Huldah? Why didn't they just go to Yirmiyahu? Especially because they would have gotten a different answer. But why? So the Gemara gives two answers. Amri Devei Rabbi Shila, interesting answer. Nashim Rachmanioten. They thought that Huldah, as a woman, women have a natural tendency to be merciful. They were hoping for a more compassionate answer from her. I don't know. According to that approach, it seems to have backfired because they didn't get a very compassionate answer from her. But Rabbi Yochanan gives a different answer. You know why they couldn't go to Yirmiyahu? They went to Huldah because Yirmiyahu was out of town. He wasn't available. Yirmiyahu lo hava hatam. He wasn't there. Where was he? He was in Chutz La'aretz. Why? Halach lahachzir aseret hashvatim. Yirmiyahu went to bring the 10 tribes back to exile. And the Gemara brings a proof for it from a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. I won't go into the proof right now, but melamed she Yirmiyahu achziran v'Yoshiyahu ben Amon malach aleim. The 10 tribes, at least some of them came back according to this Gemara. And it seems that the Gemara was motivated by those psukim in Yirmiyahu and by other things like the hints we saw before that Yoshiyahu managed to bring them back, and he got rid of the idolatry in the area of the former northern kingdom, and people from there came for Pesach. So Yirmiyahu really thought that it was possible to bring the Mashiach now. How did it all end? The end of the destruction of the end of the description of Yoshiyahu's life. We read the following. Uchamohu lo haya lefanav melech, asher shavel Adonai b'chol levavo v'chol nafsho v'chol meodo. There was no king, kichol Torat Moshe. There was no king before him that did such a great process of tshuva like Yoshiyahu. V'acharav lo kam kamohu. And after him, there also wasn't. Yoshiyahu was one of a kind. Sefer Melachim testifies about him that he did the greatest process of tshuva of any king. Achlo shav Adonai mecharon ha'po hagadol, asher chara po b'Yehuda al kol ha'keasim asher yichisom Menashe. And here it's making again the same type of answer. God didn't change his mind from the decree he had made in the days of Menashe. It sounds like Sefer Melachim, which this has been the approach of Sefer Melachim all the way through, is disagreeing with Yirmiyahu. What Huldah said, it's taking the side of Huldah. You know why Yoshiyahu didn't succeed? Because it was an impossible task. That's what it sounds like it's saying, but we'll have more to say about that in a minute. But what happened in the end? We're given just two little psukim at the end that tell us what happened. Bi'amav ala paro necho melech Mitzrayim al melech Ashur al nehar Prat. The king of Egypt went, sounds here, to fight against the king of Ashur. In a minute, we'll see that that's probably not accurate, but that's what it sounds like. Nahar Prat. Nahar Prat is the Euphrates River. I'm going to show you a map in a minute. Vayelech HaMelech Yoshiyahu likrato. And Yoshiyahu went to meet him in battle. Vayimiteu b'Megiddo. And he was killed in Megiddo. Kirototo. Vayarkivu avadav meit mi Megiddo. They brought him dead from Megiddo. Vayivyeu Yerushalayim vayikberu b'kvurato. He died in battle. So let's just understand what we're talking about here. Maybe I could put both these maps. Let me see if I can do this. Yeah, I'm going to put both these maps on the screen here. Okay, so this here, remember, is Yoshiyahu's kingdom. This is Yerushalayim. Okay, Yerushalayim is over here. What's going on here is that the king of Egypt is going all the way up here to what's today the border of Syria and Turkey. And he's passing through the northern part of Eretz Yisrael. And he passes through around here, where I'm pointing to on this map here, like around where the tuff of Mamlechet Yisrael is roughly. That's Megiddo. And for some reason, Yoshiyahu decides to attack the king of Egypt far from the borders of his kingdom, all the way up here. And it's not at all clear what is going on here and why he died. Why he went there in the first place, I should say. Divrei Hayamim gives us a little bit more information. Acharei kol zot asher ichin Yoshiyahu et habayit ala necho melech Mitzrayim lilachem bechar kemish al Prat. That's where I showed you. Vayetzei likrato Yoshiyahu. And according to Divrei Hayamim, vayishlach elav malachim. The king of Egypt sent messengers to Yoshiyahu. Lemor mali valach melech Yudah. What are you getting involved for? He sent a diplomatic message to him. Back off. I don't want to fight you. Lo alecha atayom. I didn't come to fight you. Yerushalayim is far south of here. I'm not interested in you. Ki el beit milchamti. I'm headed north to Syria and to Turkey. Stay out of this. Elohim amar levahaleni. God has sent me. Sefer Divrei Hayamim puts into the mouth of Paro Melech Mitzrayim. The lo hesev Yoshiyahu panav mimenu. But Yoshiyahu refused to turn back. Hilachem bo itchapes. Because he wanted to fight. The lo shama divrei nechomi pi Elohim. Sefer Divrei Hayamim says he ignored a prophecy that was coming from the king of Egypt. Vayavoli hilachem bevigat Megiddo. And then we're told about a little bit more about how he died. And we read afterwards, Vayikonen Yirmiyahu al Yoshiyahu. Yirmiyahu lamented the death of Yoshiyahu. Josephus Flavius, the Second Temple historian, in his Antiquities of the Jews, records an ancient tradition that sheds a little bit more light on what was going on. So let's just read this little piece here. Necho, king of Egypt, raised an army and marched to the river Euphrates in order to fight with the Medes and Babylonians who had overthrown the dominion of the Assyrians. Sefer Melachim said he went to fight Al Ashur. It sounds like he was going to fight the big superpower of Ashur. But Josephus explains to us a little bit of the geopolitical background here. The Assyrian Empire was crumbling. The former superpower that had destroyed so much was on its last legs. And there was a rising power called Bavel. Bavel was taking over. The king of Egypt didn't want Bavel to come, so the king of Egypt went to assist his former enemy Ashur to kind of prop them up in order to attempt to prevent Babylonia from taking over. That battle ultimately ended inconclusively, and of course, eventually Babylonia did take over, and this has a lot to do with what happened afterwards with Yoshiyahu's children, as I mentioned earlier. And again, I'm not going to this now. That's for another shir and another time. But the king of Egypt removed the son that was in favor of his father's policies and replaced him with a king that he assumed would be loyal to Egypt. And later on, Babylonia did come in, and that explains what happened later on, but none of that is for now. Why did Yoshiyahu go there? Yoshiyahu clearly was trying at this point to utilize the fact that Assyria had withdrawn from the area and there was a power vacuum, that the Assyrian Empire was crumbling. Yoshiyahu wanted this opportunity to to reconquer, so to speak, the territory of the former Malchut Yisrael. He didn't want Egypt to go and fight against Babylonia and then take over the western part of the former Assyrian Empire, including the northern part of Eretz Yisrael. He wanted to exert the independence of Am Yisrael over all of Eretz Yisrael. In other words, he wanted to continue Yirmiyahu's vision. The Aseret HaShvatim were back, and now we had the opportunity in his mind to have a king from Beit David ruling over all of the Shivtei Yisrael in all of Eretz Yisrael. And to do that, he has to stop Paro Necho. But armed with the encouragement he had gotten from Yirmiyahu, it sounds like he felt, look what he's been doing for all these years. For the last 19 years, he's been purifying the land of idolatry. And all of the tshuva that he's done, certainly God's going to protect him. So why didn't God protect him? Well, Sefer Melachim gave us one answer. The Nevuah of Chulda. It was too late. It was too late. There was nothing to talk about. But if there is a machloket between Yirmiyahu and Chulda, it sounds like the rabbis were on the side of Yirmiyahu. Gemara here, Masechet Tanit. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Mipnei ma ne'anash Yoshiyahu. Why was he killed? If he did such a great thing. Mipnei shehaya lo limalech b'Yirmiyahu v'lo nimlach. He should have asked Yirmiyahu. It sounds, again, we're not told of any nevuah from Yirmiyahu against this. There's hints in Divrei Hayamim that there was some kind of nevuah, or there could have been some kind of nevuah. But according to the Gemara, he didn't go to ask Yirmiyahu, and that was his mistake. For that, he was killed. Why didn't he go to ask the Navi? That's a very common thing for kings of Yehudah to do, to consult with the Navi. He thought he didn't need to. My darash. What did he interpret here? It says in the Torah, "V'cherev lo ta'avor ba'artzechem." It says in the Torah, in the book of Vayikra, that if you follow the Torah, no sword shall pass through your land. My cherev, what does that mean? Ilei mecherev she'ina shel shalom. If you think that the pasuk simply meant that there won't be a war in the land, v'aktiv v'natati shalom ba'aretz. It already said v'natati shalom ba'aretz. So if it already said v'natati shalom ba'aretz, that there will be peace, why did it also have to say cherev lo ta'avor ba'aretzechem, that no sword shall pass through your land? Afilu shel shalom. He figured even a cherev shel shalom shouldn't pass through the land. In other words, he thought that he has the ability, because he's following the Torah, to exert his authority and to bring sovereignty back to the land. Not only to defend the land against an attack, and not only that there won't be an attack, but that no foreign army should feel free marching through Eretz Yisrael. He can exert his sovereignty here. And since it said it explicitly in the Torah, he made the mistake of not asking the Navi. Okay, but then why was he wrong? It did say that in the Torah. Hu eino yodea she'ein doro domeh yafeh. He didn't realize something. And there are other indications. First of all, there are indications in Sefer Yirmiyahu about this. But the rabbis develop it elsewhere in Chazal. Rashi quotes it also. That Yoshiyahu went on this major government-sponsored campaign to rid the country of idolatry. But the people weren't behind him, at least not all of them, and not enough of them. And that the people continued to worship idolatry secretly. He just drove them underground. And therefore, he understood the pasuk correctly. If the people had followed him and done tshuva according to this Gemara, Yirmiyahu's prophecy would have come true. The Churban was not unavoidable. Yoshiyahu did everything he could heroically, but tragically the people weren't behind him. And a leader can't lead if the people don't follow. And therefore, the pasuk, he interpreted the pasuk correctly. If you follow the Torah, then no sword will pass through your land. And he was following the Torah, but he didn't realize that the people weren't, and he didn't think to consult with the Navi. This is where the chills started going down my spine. But before I get into that, I want to do. It's 7 o'clock, but we started a few minutes late, so I'll give myself a few minutes. If anyone has the ability to stick around, I'll make sure to finish by 7:10. I want to read this last Gemara, and then I also want to respond to whatever's in the chat. This is part of a lengthy. I brought here two selections, two excerpts from a lengthy discussion in Sanhedrin about this. First of all, and this goes back a little bit to what we spoke about last year, but it's relevant to this. Menashe did tshuva and is machloket whether there are, the Mishnah in Sanhedrin lists 3 kings who have no chelek in olam haba. They have no portion in the world to come. One is Yeravam ben Nevad, who originally is the one who broke the 10 tribes away from Malchut Beit David. The second is Achav Melech Yisrael, one of the worst kings ever in the northern kingdom. And the third is Menashe, but there's machloket about Menashe. And Rabbi Yehuda says Menashe yesh lo chelek l'olam haba. And Rabbi Yochanan u'shneihem mikra echad darshu. That original gzeira that was given in the days of Menashe, what does it mean? Biglal Menashe. So I'm sorry, the pasuk in Yirmiyahu says, even Yirmiyahu says later on, that the Churban came Biglal Menashe ben Chizkiyahu. What does that mean? Mar savar Biglal Menashe sha'asat tshuva ve'inu lo avud, umar savar Biglal Menashe de lo avad tshuva. The second opinion here thinks that Menashe didn't really do tshuva. He did tshuva, but not enough. But the first opinion says, no, Menashe did tshuva, but the people didn't follow him. And therefore, ultimately, the Churban came, not according to that opinion, not because of Menashe, but because the people didn't follow Menashe. In the end, it's not about the king, it's about the people. And that's the lesson, according to the Gemara and Tanit, that Yoshiyahu tragically learned. But a little later on down that same page, we read the following. The Gemara here discusses, Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Mai dichtiv Bereshit Mamlechut Yoyakim ben Yoshiyahu. In the book of Yirmiyahu, we're told twice an unusual language. Bereshit, at the beginning of the kingdom of the reign of Yehoiakim, and at the beginning of the reign of Tzidkiyahu. But that's not a normal terminology. If it wanted to tell us it happened at the beginning of his reign, it would usually say B'shana achat lemelech. Why Bereshit? So the Gemara says Bereshit is meant us to think of Bereshit, which means God wanted to return the world to chaos. Bishvil Yehoiakim. God wanted to bring the Churban already in the days of Yehoiakim. Why didn't he? Nistakel b'doro v'nitkara dato. Yehoiakim, we already said, was an evil king. But his generation had enough righteous people in it that God said, okay, even if the king is evil, if the people are behind him, the people are behind me. So this is the mirror image of one opinion of the days of Menashe and what the Gemara said of the days of Yoshiyahu. If you have a king who's righteous, but the people are not, that's not going to help. Here's the opposite. The king was evil, but the people weren't evil. So God held back, and he didn't. It was like a new Bereshit. It was like God said, I'll create the world again. And then Bikesh HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lachzir et Olam Kulo Tov V'Avo B'Shvil Doro Shel Tzidkiyahu. In Tzidkiyahu's time, after some of the people had already been taken to exile, the last king, God also, at the beginning of the days of Tzidkiyahu, was going to bring in the Churban. V'nitkara dato bit Tzidkiyahu. But because the king himself was righteous, Tzidkiyahu, God held off for a while. Ultimately, he brought the Churban. So if the king is bad, but the people are good, there won't be a Churban. And if the king is good, but the people are bad, like in the days of Tzidkiyahu, then also there won't be a Churban. But wait a second, the Gemara asks. It says about Tzidkiyahu, Vayas Harabei Hashem. How can you tell me that Tzidkiyahu was a good king? It says that Tzidkiyahu was a bad king. And the Gemara answers, Shayabi Adol Limchot V'lo Micha. Tzidkiyahu was a good king, and here also there's a lot to say. If you read Yirmiyahu Perek Lamed Chet, you'll see exactly what that's talking about. Tzidkiyahu himself wanted to do the right thing, but he was too weak, and he didn't stand up to the people. And therefore, ultimately, that's what the Gemara means about Tzidkiyahu, and that's ultimately why the Churban happened. What do I see from all this, and why is this so significant? And then I'll look at the chats. Something very powerful here. What did we just read? It sounds like even when there's a decree, it's never too late. Yoshiyahu was right, Yirmiyahu was right. But you need the leaders and you need the people behind them. But if it's a choice between the leaders and the people, you need both. You need good leadership and you need the people to follow the leaders. Even the greatest leader like Yoshiyahu, who, here, I put it back on the screen here, heroic and tragic story of King Yoshiyahu. What could be more heroic and what could be more tragic? And according to that Gemara in Tanya, the tragedy was that the people didn't follow the king. But even if you have a bad king, the people, and Tzidkiyahu's problem was that he didn't try to change the people. But even a bad king like Yehoiakim, according to that Gemara, the people can still make a change. And this is what I think is the powerful lesson for these days right here, right now. So many people have written and so many people have talked, and it's so clear to almost everybody that the leaders on both sides, politicians, the media, whoever else it is, are the leaders on both sides are stoking up discord and whatever, where a solid majority polls say that 70% of the country wants some kind of a compromise. And it's very easy to blame the politicians and it's very easy to blame the leaders. But if the leaders lead and the people don't follow, it doesn't help. Ultimately, it's not up to the leaders. Ultimately, it's up to the people. And therefore, the lesson of this Tisha B'Av, I think, is that it's up to us. This is not going to happen top down. Like I said at the beginning, there's a clear and present danger. I don't want to use the word churban, but there's a clear and present danger right here, this Tisha B'Av, of events of the past repeating themselves. And if there's a lesson of these nivuot, it's that don't wait for the leaders to fix this. It has to come from us. And there's a lot of grassroots efforts, and I've seen beautiful pictures, and I participated myself in something in Yerushalayim, and I'm giving this year, but my wife and my son are at something now, attempts to create dialogue, etc. That's what we need. And I think that's the powerful message that comes out of this, a message of hope. Let me just, before we end, let me just try to respond very briefly to the messages that were in the chat here. Okay, let me see. I'll scroll up to the beginning. Oh, wow, there's a lot of messages here. Okay, we'll do this very quickly. Okay. People asking if it starts at 6. Yes, at 6. Okay. Wasn't the decree already set in the time of Chizkiah and Malachim when Yeshayahu gives the prophecies that his descendants would be sent to Bavel? Okay, that's a good point. That's a good point. So that fits into the end of this year. That there were prophecies earlier. Yeshayahu also decreed destruction already from the beginning. Yeshayahu Perek Aleph, we read it this past Shabbat. But apparently prophecies of destruction, afilu cherev chada, it's never too late to change.
Scott, I have to go back.
Everyone just please mute yourself for another minute. Couldn't we do complete shuvah and annul the decree? Is there no ability for our sincere prayer? So that was the answer.
Go back on that.
Yes. Okay. Perhaps Yirmiyahu was talking about a return after the destruction of the temple. Perhaps Yoshiyahu's efforts gave the exiled Jews the ability to survive in exile, to repent and return to the land of Israel. I think that's what happened in the end. That's what happens with all Nevuot Nechama. That prophecies of consolation, if they don't come true in their time, they wind up coming true later on. And some of them are waiting still to be fulfilled. But I think you're correct about that. That doesn't sound like Chulda's prophecy that he would die in peace. No, because he didn't listen to Chulda. He went to war and he died in battle. It seems to tell us how important it is to who we ask our questions to. Yes, indeed. Important message for today. I agree completely. Somebody needs to go now. Okay. If this is the case, what about all the seculars in Eretz Yisrael trying to move everything holy, how they disrespect the land? I don't have time to respond to that here, but I'll just say that I don't think that's what we need to talk about right now. I think we need to look and find the good in each side. And I really have a lot to say about this, and perhaps at some future time, or whoever asked that question, Aviva Cohen, if you're still online, you're welcome to contact me privately. I think that as a Torah Jew, we have to be able to understand that the positions of those who oppose us are there are messages there that are important for us to hear, and that our own observance of Torah will be enhanced by it. I have a lot more to say about that, but there's no time now. Thank you, Rabbi Haber. Thank you, Sarita Srego. Okay. All right. And thank you. Okay, so thank you to all of you, and Shanizke Legula Shlema. Easy rest of the fast for everyone.